Hi, Trina.
Hi, Mario.
So, Trina, this is one of the first episodes of the Meritas Cannabis World Tour, and what better place to start than pretty close to home here for me. So Trina is the founder of our cannabis practice group and is really the person that brought me into the practice of cannabis law in a couple different areas that I do practice. So I think there's no better person that I could have started with this series. Trina, we're going to have just a pretty easy discussion about legalization of cannabis in Canada and what that is looking like and where we came from and where do we think we're going. Those are the real pillars of it. So I'll just jump right into it. How did Canada, a G7 country, get to be in the state of legalization that it's in? And we'll certainly have to get a sense of what that looks like in a little bit more detail.
Sure. Well, I don't know that it's a totally easy question to answer completely, but I'll give you my thoughts on it. I mean, this was really, I think, a significant policy change that was about almost a century in the making, because cannabis was a completely prohibited substance here since the 1920s, right through until almost the end of the last century. So really what happened, I believe, was that the medical cannabis framework was what paved the way for legalization in this country. And really the medical framework that we had for about 20 years before legalization happened was really a result of the civil disobedience of individuals who were prepared to put their liberty at risk to pursue their belief in cannabis as a medicine, and the court challenges that resulted from those actions. So, really all boils down to Section 7 of our Charter and Rights and Freedoms that says that, we all have the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And then, the courts interpreted that as meaning we shouldn't have to choose between our freedom and our ability to use medication that works for our bodies. So I think that really set the stage with medical cannabis being legal in Canada, changing social norms, the emergence of commercial production licenses that happened here in 2014 for medical cannabis, when the creation of large publicly traded companies that grew very quickly. There were kind of all of these different forces at play that kind of leaded into a situation where cannabis became, I think, a ripe campaign topic or platform for the Liberal Party in the election that took place when Justin Trudeau was elected.
And just to back up a sec, because it's interesting, and some of our listeners may not know, when you talked about the Charter Section 7 and the court cases, what was specifically being challenged there under Section 7? And I know it's more detailed than this, but what did the court find in relation to cannabis?
Yeah, we'll talk about one case in particular that I think is one of the seminal cases. Really was a case, the Parker case in Ontario, where a man by the name of Terry Parker, who had epilepsy, was growing cannabis and using cannabis to suppress his seizures. And he was charged under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, because at that point in time, any possession, production, or sale of cannabis was strictly prohibited and was an offense under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. So in defense of his charges, he pleaded that section violated his Section 7 charter rights, because he was forced to choose between using cannabis, which he found was the only kind of successful way to treat epilepsy for him, and his freedom, because he was subjecting himself to possible imprisonment by committing an offense under the CDSA by doing so. And he was successful, and that was that decision of the Ontario Court of Appeal was what led to really directly the creation of the medical program in Canada, because those provisions of the CDSA were completely struck down, and we were left with this complete complete vacuum or lack of any sort of restriction whatsoever. So, the federal government in Canada was forced to take action and did create these new regulations to regulate the production and sale of cannabis for medical purposes only, to fill that gap that was created by the court striking down those provisions. So essentially, it does come down to, you know, the being facing potential penal consequences that put your liberty, your freedom in jeopardy and subject you to possible imprisonment by making a choice which you believe is promotes your health.
No, understood. And then, so what was happening between the Parker decision and, you know, Trudeau's and the Liberal Party's campaign promises? Because we have a 15 to 20-year gap there where there are regulations of some sort existed, but there was a decent amount of time, more than a decade for sure, between those regulations being in place and you know, the Cannabis Act and Cannabis Act regulations that we find ourselves within or with today. What did that period of time look like?
Yeah, there's about an 18-year span there between when that medical program was created and when we saw the Cannabis Act come into effect in 2018. So it was ever changing. There was, you know, it wasn't like the initial medical framework that the federal government created was to everyone's satisfaction. So, you know, there continued to be court challenges, mostly based on Section 7 of the Charter. Those court challenges were successful in many cases, and the government was forced to make further kind of revisions and subtle nuanced changes to the framework. But the main change came in about 2013 when the government decided, you know, this kind of program we've created where you grow your own medicine or you have somebody grow it for you or you buy from a government supply wasn't really working for the federal government any longer. And the preference was to move to a system where it was all commercial production through licensed companies. And so that was kind of a major fundamental shift which came into effect in 2014. And we started to see the emergence of an actual industry where we had businesses that were created for the purpose of getting licensed and producing and selling medical cannabis. You know, the personal production side of things was taken away, but was very quickly challenged and was successfully challenged. And then, you know, a few years later, we saw it reintroduced into the iteration of the medical framework that basically we still have today, which is this hybrid of both. So you can buy from a licensed producer your medication and have it shipped to you, or you can register to grow it yourself, or you can designate someone to grow it for you. So that's really kind of what transitioned into the Cannabis Act in 2018 and what we still have today.
And during that period of time, and it's maybe an anecdotal piece, but I remember during that time, you know, I grew up in Vancouver, and in Vancouver, it was certainly pre-2017, there were many cannabis dispensaries, they would call themselves, and the city seemed to be okay with them. I understand that they were charging them a pretty significant fee to operate, like a licensing fee, but that they were. So is this what was termed the gray market that I've heard about?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely widespread non-compliance with the legal framework, right? Whether it was selling medical cannabis from storefronts, which wasn't part of the medical framework and still isn't today. It's a mail-only delivery system for medical cannabis, or whether it was just pure recreational sales that were outside of the legal framework completely at that point in time. You know, there was a vast gray market, illicit market, whatever you want to call it, in this country. And we got to the point, I think, where law enforcement agencies who were being forced to deal with scarce resources and how to allocate those resources in the most efficient and effective way to advance public health and safety, you know, many were just actually, like the Vancouver Police Department, were basically coming out and saying, look, unless there's some reason for us to believe, you know, there's other aggravating factors like there, you know, or connections to organized crime, or there's intentionally selling to kids, or there's other types of drugs involved, things like that, we're pretty much going to leave you alone. We've got bigger fish to fry, so to speak. We've got other problems, more important problems that we have to deal with than the sale of cannabis. And so it almost became to a point where it felt like it was de facto legal. And that wasn't the same maybe right across the country. I think Vancouver was probably one end of the spectrum, and probably as you moved east, things changed, but there certainly across the country was, widespread, obviously, use and sale and production of cannabis outside the legal framework. And, as I said, the public opinion about, I think when we got to the point where cannabis legalization was introduced, we had reached the point where polls were showing where the majority of Canadians were certainly either in support of or indifferent to the concept of either legalization or at least decriminalization of cannabis.
So that led to, if I understand correctly, a platform position by the then the Liberal Party that was seeking to be elected. They made it part of their platform, the legalization of cannabis, and we ended up with the Cannabis Act and its regulations. If it's possible, Trina, I know it's a tough one, but in a nutshell, what has that created as far as an industry? And I think the thing that's important to people that don't know much about Canadian, our legislation is parts here fall under federal jurisdiction, and then the other parts fall to the provinces. So what you may see in Ontario is not what you may see in New Brunswick or Alberta or British Columbia. So in a nutshell, what did we end up with here in Canada?
Yeah, well, we ended up with a framework where essentially what the federal government did was they just expanded the production framework we already had for medical cannabis. So there's no delineation between the production of cannabis that's destined for the recreational market versus the medical market. The rules about how cannabis is cultivated, how it's processed, labeled, packaged, are the same in both streams. And so really the existing medical producers upon legalization were just permitted to kind of expand the scope of what they were making to be sold into the recreational stream as well. The medical framework also remained federal, but what the feds said were provinces and territories, you can decide for yourself how you'd like recreational cannabis distributed and sold in your province. So we did end up with a mishmash, and we still have today a variety of approaches as you go across the country, everything from Saskatchewan, which is a completely private system where you have private distributors, private retailers, and retailers can deal directly with producers, to a number of provinces like Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, where it's a completely public system where the government controls all distribution and all sale, both online and storefront. With some provinces, again, with hybrid models kind of in between. So every province and territory that you go into, the framework is a little bit different. Part of the federal framework was that you could also grow 4 plants at home yourself for recreational purposes without any type of, approval or registration required. And, the provinces of Manitoba and Quebec decided they didn't like that. So there was a provincial prohibition on home growing imposed by those provinces, despite the fact that federally it was legal. Those have been challenged in those provinces and are undergoing active court challenges right now. So we'll see where that ends up. But the rules about where you can consume, how old you have to be, the minimum age was set at 18 as a federal default, but has been altered and raised in a few provinces, including Quebec, where the minimum age was raised to 21 ultimately. In many provinces it was raised to 19. So, when in any given place where you are within Canada, if you are wanting to consume cannabis, where you buy it, what you're allowed to buy, how old you have to be to buy it, and where you can consume it, the answers to those questions are going to be different depending on where you're located.
Interesting. Is there a province that you would say has taken a more cannabis-friendly approach to some that maybe less so?
Yeah, I would say Saskatchewan's probably one of the most cannabis-friendly in the sense that the government has really stepped back and allowed just industry to kind of control distribution and sale. There's obviously a licensing process that has to take place, and you have to go through regulatory approvals, but the chain, the actual supply chain does not include the government. That there's no government markup on the provinces. No government markup on the products. The province has decided not to include itself in the supply chain in any respect. You could contrast that with a province like Quebec, where the government has entirely controlled distribution and sale. The SQDC is the only online retailer, the only storefront seller, the only distributor, the exclusive distributor of cannabis within the province. And in addition to that, the provincial government in Quebec has, tried to ban home growing, has put restrictions on how cannabis producers can promote their products, and has actually restricted the type of products that they're allowed or that they are permitted to sell and are prepared to sell in SQDC stores. So no topicals, lower concentrates and lower amounts of THC in edibles, all of these restrictions are taking a very kind of prohibitionist approach, I think, to the cannabis industry there. So, and again, every province is a little bit different. Some of them imposed surtaxes and kind of extra taxes on certain types of cannabis products, and taken other steps which, would certainly be conceived as, not being conducive to promoting the legal industry over the illicit one.
So if someone wanted a topical in Quebec, they couldn't get one except through the medical stream?
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
so given that there's a bit of a mishmash, Trina, and we're 2021, so there's about 3 years have passed almost since the government said go to the industry. What have we seen as far as growing pains, maybe, and if we have seen some growing pains for the industry, what do you think are some possible resolutions to those, or what could continue to allow the industry to flourish and to develop, as we know it's in its infancy, as 3 years in?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing that we're going to be watching very closely in the industry is the review of the Cannabis Act, which is going to commence this fall. So when the Cannabis Act was brought into force, built right into the act was this mandatory review at the 3-year mark. So that will be this fall, and Health Canada will be conducting a kind of a comprehensive review of cannabis legalization, in particular what its effect has been on public health and safety, use of cannabis by minors, and things of it, how much of a dent we've put into the illicit market. All of these issues are going to be studied and recommendations probably made, I would think, to amend the act or the regulations and the framework in some way to Parliament. So, we're going to see a lot of things criticized from an industry point of view. Certainly from the industry point of view, the tension between trying to promote public health and safety versus displace the illicit market has swung too far in favor of the kind of protectionist side of public health and safety, and it's come at the expense of the ability of the industry to really flourish, the legal industry to flourish and displace the illicit market. So, did we find the right balance? Maybe not quite. Maybe we were a little over protectionist, and maybe there's some room to allow cannabis companies, for example, to do a little more robust promotion of products in a way that's still not going to be appealing to kids. Maybe, we can look at the way that we're requiring these products to be packaged and labeled, or certain restrictions on how the products are made, how much THC is allowed to go into the products. All of these things will be subject to analysis and review this year, and we'll see. I mean, I think taxation and duties is another big issue that we're going to have to look at, that the industry has been complaining about. When you look at the annual federal regulatory fees, the federal excise duties on the products, goods and services, sales taxes on the products, and as I say, these additional taxes that have been placed on certain types of products in certain provinces. The taxation burden on cannabis is very high in this country, and has certainly been a challenge for the industry as well. So, we'll be taking a look, and I'm sure on the medical side, especially, making some very strong advocacy statements to hopefully remove all taxation and all duties from medical cannabis at the very least, but also taking a look at whether we are essentially, frustrating the efforts of the legal industry to displace the illicit market by overtaxing it.
And if I understand correctly, not only overtaxing, but maybe not allowing it to compete at the same level if we're talking about THC limits. I think I've seen, or we've all seen, articles where the illicit market promotes its products very similarly to very well-known products in the marketplace and other marketplaces, candy and things of this nature. And also their THC level, the THC content is such that it's really difficult for the, I guess maybe Trina, if you want to, can you explain that a bit? Like, what limits are there on THC currently in edibles or beverages? And I'll just give you anecdotally something I saw on Twitter. Somebody said, in order for me to feel a buzz off of cannabis beverages, I need to consume 400 grams of sugar.
Right.
And so can you explain that to maybe somebody that doesn't know what's going on there?
Yeah, so Canada landed on 10 milligrams of THC as being the limit as to what could go into any package of an edible product. So that would be a solid edible or a beverage, right? They would qualify as edibles. And there's been a lot of criticism of that as being an unduly low limit. Now, you know, many states in the US that have legalized cannabis have edibles packaging limits that are much higher than that. They may limit the amount in one serving to 10 milligrams of THC, but then they would permit the placement of multiple servings within a package. So that's something that's been criticized very highly from the outset. Health Canada's response was, we're trying intentionally to take a very conservative approach here that's going to hopefully minimize the opportunity for people to accidentally over ingest or for, you know, harm to come to children who mistake it for regular food and consume it by limiting the amount that's in any one package to 10 milligrams of THC. But you know, that might not be you know, a huge deal for something like a bite-sized gummy or something of that nature, where, you know, easy enough to pop a few of them, I guess, from different packages if you really wanted to. But you know, for something like a cookie or like a baked good, for example, if you had to buy separate ones just to get 10 milligrams each time, and you happen to be a consumer who wants to ingest more than 10 milligrams of THC in one setting, you're, you know, yes, potentially consuming a lot of calories and a lot of you know, sugar to get the dose that you're looking for. I think another concern has been on the environmental side, where we're really restricting the amount of THC in one particular package, and we're creating a need for consumers to buy multiple packages of things that they could otherwise buy in one package. We're really duplicating and exponentially increasing the amount of packaging that you know, is seen to be quite wasteful and harmful to the environment. So again, I'm sure this will be an issue that will be a hot topic of discussion during the upcoming review, and we'll see if there's any inclination to budge. I think we're probably still going to, as a country, err on the side of caution and promoting public health and safety. But you know, I think these are some of the issues that I think there probably is room for discussion, at least on.
Thank you, Trina. Just to finalize, what is that review process, and maybe more importantly, the timeline? So for somebody that wants to follow on, when can we expect, I guess, maybe one, submissions, and then two, some sort of report or some sort of update from the government of what they heard after the review process?
Yeah, we're really not sure yet exactly what to expect. We know it's going to start in October at the latest, because that is mandated within the Cannabis Act itself. And the Act also says that the review must be completed within 18 months and presented to Parliament within 18 months. But Health Canada has yet to announce what that review process is going to actually entail or look like. And my understanding is that Health Canada is still working on that. So, you know, I'm assuming that there will be some sort of consultative process where the public will have an opportunity to submit comments as well. But, you know, still waiting to hear exactly what that's going to look like and what the process will be.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you, Trina.